In my last video, I covered some of the most popular fish in the seafood market. Now, fishing has had a profound impact on our history, diets, health, economies, and even geopolitics. Previously, I discovered the origins and history of fisheries related to tuna, salmon, sardines, halibut, and others. However, there are a few big names that I missed out on that I'm going to be covering on today's video. Keep in mind that some of the names of these fish are not necessarily scientific terms, but rather broad common names and marketing terms. So let's start off with catfish. There are countless genii, and even more so species within the order of catfish. They are, after all, bony fish with ray fins, and are most distinctive for having barbels. These barbels do look rather similar to whiskers that you'd see on a dog or a cat or any other common mammal, even though these catfish are certainly not mammals. The reason why many mammals, after all, have whiskers is because they, generally speaking, have poor eyesight, and whiskers add an extra sense of touch. These barbels for catfish do the same thing, but on top of that, they also have taste buds, so that these bottom feeders can taste organic molecules and matter at the bottom of the substrate. This makes it excellent for foraging food. Keep in mind that catfish also have terrible eyesight. After all, you don't really need particularly good eyesight when you live in murky waters. So it's much better to get a better sense of touch and taste than a sense of sight. The areas most well known for producing a lot of catfish are those in the southern United States, where they're quite popular for frying. On top of that, Southeast Asia also has a lot of catfish, particularly in the Mekong River. This is home to the highest biodiversity of freshwater fish in the world, including some of the largest species of catfish. Most notably, surprise surprise, the Mekong catfish. Their predilection for shallow waters makes them quite good for aquaculture environments, and it makes them quite cheap. Another relatively easy fish to grow and cheap fish to buy is the tilapia. As stated before, much of the terminology I'm using in reference to fish is not actually scientific terminology, but rather common names to refer to countless species. Tilapia are probably only rivaled by catfish as being the cheapest form of seafood, even though they're not actually from the sea, they're from freshwater. They by and large reside in shallow bodies of water such as creeks and ponds. This makes them easy to fish, and far easier to fish than, say, deep ocean water species. The fact that they're quite easy to breed in small bodies of water makes them excellent for aquaculture as well. In fact, they may have been the first animals to aquaculture, dating all the way back to either ancient Egypt or ancient Canaan, which was eventually conquered by Egypt. This makes sense since the Nile tilapia is quite resilient to poor water quality, and this made them very hardy, especially at a time when we didn't have the technology to ensure high water quality. Unfortunately, their widespread cultivation has also led them to becoming an invasive species and outcompeting many other types of fish in search of vegetation. However, their love of vegetation has also made them very popular in hydroponics, as they eat a lot of algae and provide fertilizer. They are also one of the most common sources of protein for many people in Southeast Asia. However, tilapia by and large are less nutritious compared to other fish, with less omega-3 fatty acids. Given the fact that much of the tilapia we eat is aquacultured, it's difficult to tell whether this is due to poor nutritional value or, more accurately, relatively poor nutritional value due to poor farming practices rather than the fish's physiology. Generally speaking, tilapia is oftentimes raised in developing countries with more lax regulations, which oftentimes leads to poorer water quality, higher rates of ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates. This can make them quite unhealthy, not only to the fish themselves, but also to the humans who eat them, depending on the situation. Next on the list is one that is less controversial, the sea bass. The European bass is quite possibly the most widely eaten actual bass that is actually from the sea, as they tend to congregate to the shores of cooler waters. One of the quote-unquote sea bass that isn't actually a real bass is known as the Chilean sea bass. And yes, the Chilean sea bass is actually from Chile, or more accurately the frigid waters of Patagonia, but it is actually not a true type of sea bass. It is known as the Patagonian toothfish. It's loved for its taste and texture, but its name changed due to the fact that toothfish doesn't sound particularly appetizing. No one really gets their stomach grumbling by hearing the word toothfish. Moving on to lionfish. Now, you probably don't associate lionfish with food. You probably more associate them with the type of fish you see in a public aquarium, or perhaps in a nature documentary about coral reefs. However, in more recent years, lionfish have become a more popular source of protein for people in the southern United States and the Caribbean. On face value, this might be unusual. After all, they're venomous, and they're not even native to the region. They're from the Indo-Pacific, not the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. However, they're popular in saltwater aquariums, which has led many aquarists to have them in their tanks, only to find out that they are venomous and also try to eat any other fish in your tank. The saltwater fish are not cheap to buy as pets, and lo and behold, many irresponsible aquarists have dumped these lionfish into the ocean. Now, if you dump a lionfish into the ocean at Boston, that's not a big deal because the water's too cold. But if you're in Florida, that is a big deal. These lionfish have basically spread across the coast of Florida, and they eat everything in sight, destroying much of the local ecosystem. This has led to a booming spearfishing industry to collect lionfish. As long as you fillet them, they're perfectly safe to eat. Moving on to the most controversial fished fish of all, sharks. Sharks, in contrast to the vast majority of other fish, don't actually have real bones, aside from their jaws and teeth. Their bodies are made up of cartilage. Same thing goes with stingrays. They are one of the few cartilaginous fish in the world. They have inspired fear and fascination among humans. Unfortunately, they were also heavily demonized throughout much of the 20th century, and had a reputation for just being man-eating beasts. However, over the course of the later half of the 20th century and the 21st century, our education about them has improved. Unfortunately, shark fishing continues to be a common practice in many East Asian countries, namely China. Most of you have already probably been aware of shark fin soup, which is commonly served at weddings, oftentimes as a display of high status and wealth. The process of producing shark fin soup usually means fishing them out, cutting off their dorsal fins, keeping the dorsal fins, and then dunking the rest of the shark's body into the ocean, where it ceases to function properly. It can't maneuver without its dorsal fin and usually bleeds, sinks, and dies. The reason as to why they don't keep the rest of the shark meat is because shark meat by and large has poor quality. It's not particularly tasty and not profitable. This has led to a conservation disaster. In sharp contrast to, say, sardines or anchovies, which are low on the food chain and reproduce rapidly, sharks are large, usually predators, and they exist at higher levels of the food chain. As a result, they have pretty slow reproductive cycles when compared to bony fish. This means that their numbers can't rebound as easily. In response to this, many island nations have created shark sanctuaries, preventing predominantly Chinese fishing companies from entering their waters. On top of that, many Western countries have also banned the practice, and even some East Asian countries have banned the practice as well, most notably Taiwan. Hopefully, with these regulations in place on sharks and other type of fish, more and more will rebound. Thanks for watching. In my next video, I'm going to be covering some of the most popular invertebrates we eat. Stay tuned.